Good morning. It's 4:14 a.m. Good morning. I figured I would make this video for informational purposes. Nobody's really made a video about the SB100 yet and the experience with staff and aid stations and all that. So I'm going to try to include a bunch just so that people can get hyped on what the SB100 is all about. It's not a race, it's a ride. I call myself an amateur rider at best. I probably do one longer ride on the weekends. Sometimes it's 35, sometimes it's 65 miles. I've actually never ridden a Century before. I was basically off the couch up until 6 weeks ago. Nutritionally, I know next to nothing about endurance sport nutrition. I ate a good meal last night, some chili. For those of you feeling like you might be lacking the experience, my buddy Ethan is doing it straight off the couch. He just got back from his honeymoon and he's on a 30-pound Surly with gravel bike tires. Definitely not optimized for a Century by any means, but he's still gonna do it. When you're riding the 100 miles, they have an option for you to be able to pack a bag that gets taken to the top of the biggest climb, Gibraltar climb. All of this is what I'm having in the second half of the day. This is what I'm bringing with me in the first half of the day. So that's before the big climb. Ride strategy-wise, I don't really have one. Finishing is my strategy. My hope is that we can jump on a big pack for the first 40 miles. And then once we hit the Gibraltar climb, settle into our own pace. And from there, you know, you do the 3,800 feet of climbing or 4,000 feet of climbing, and then it's downhill and flat. So I'm optimistic that if we can get Gibraltar done, we can get the whole thing done. But this, I mean, it remains to be seen. I'm on mile 8.6 right now and I haven't even gotten to the start line. This is the start line as well as the finish line. It's also the staging area where you pick up your packet the day before or where you register the day of. There aren't any accommodations in the morning. You have to fill up your water bottles before you get to the start line, but there was the VeloFix van there. It's a mobile bike mechanic that was also driving around the course throughout the day, and that was helpful in case you needed to take care of any last minute essentials. Pit stop. Here's Ethan.
Weighing at 50 pounds. Never been professionally tuned.
Doesn't matter.
Never been fitted.
I'm not exactly sure how many people signed up for the 100-mile ride as opposed to the other three options. I was number 300 and something, so I imagine there was at least 400 people doing the 100-mile ride.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, off you go. Be safe, have fun.
It took us over a minute to actually get out of the start chute. I think they were trying to discourage people from forming pelotons. I was a little bit disappointed by this, as I think it would have been very beneficial to jump in with a big group for the first fifth or so of the ride before we hit the first climb. The ride from the start line to the first climb at Lake Casitas is fairly uneventful. The scenery is beautiful and you weave through the small beach towns of both Summerland and Carpinteria. The bike lanes were wide enough to fit multiple riders. Now, it's a good thing to keep in mind that this is not a closed course, so you do have to share the road and abide by all the rules of the road. There are times where you've got a ton of momentum, but you got to slow down and wait for stoplights or stop signs, etc. So just started the Casitas climb. It's climb 2 of 11. Saying. This one's around 1,800 feet. I've already done 412, got 6 more miles to go. Yeah, my only qualm is it feels like it's kind of every man for himself. Packs aren't really sticking together. I thought there'd be like more kind of mini pelotons, but people are just cranking, which is great. It'll be interesting to see how it kind of settles out as people find more of their pace and as I find more of my pace. As we approached aid station 1, we actually had to descend past the top of the Lake Casitas climb, which was a little bit of a bummer, but I also get it because this is the only out and back of the whole course, and you kind of have to have an out and back in order to make it exactly 100 miles. And here's the first aid station. This was a pretty standard spread of food that we saw across all the aid stations. They all had goose, candy, trail mix, and bananas, along with Gatorade and water. A few of the aid stations later in the ride had hot food, but the first couple aid stations just had the basics. The ride between aid 1 and 2 is pretty uneventful. You get a good descent coming down the Lake Casitas climb that you just did, and then you also get to climb the backside of Gibraltar Canyon, which is a climb that's known well amongst locals. Other than that, there's a good bit of flat, and we actually had a few guys that we were able to form a train with and get a good average speed as we came into the second station. Aid Station 2 had all the same stuff that Aid Station 1 did, plus some cookies and PB&Js. We made a quick stop and kept going. There's a good bit of flat after aid station 2 as we wound through some orchards and fields. It's a beautiful little section, no doubt, but you're quickly met with the Toro and legendary Ladera climb. For those of you that don't know, many international cycling athletes train at Ladera Road. It's 1 mile, feels like it's straight up. You can see the top from the bottom, and people do repeats on this. As for this ride, I resorted to standing in my lowest gear the whole way up, while some people zigzagged and walked. Wow, that's so wild. There's so many people on this climb. Summit. Killer. Following Ladera is a beautiful stretch of road with epic views of all of Santa Barbara. You also get some fun poppy climbs in there and some great turns. It feels like a really surfy part of the route that goes by really quickly just because of how much fun you're having and how beautiful the views are. Also, it's worth noting that I rode 9.6 miles from my house to the start line and I didn't start my Strava over. So you guys will just have to subtract 9.6 from the total miles on my Strava map. Sorry about that. All right. I flatted out. Ethan waited for me. It took about 10 minutes to switch it. Now we're almost at aid station 3. This is the one right before the big Gibraltar climb. So here we freaking go. This is the first hot meal that the ride provided, although we ended up getting lukewarm eggs. Scrambled eggs.
Lukewarm scrambled eggs.
No, I'm not even sure they're warm. I think there was better food before, but we got there pretty late and all the other rides had actually come through already and kind of taken stuff from the station. So we were kind of getting the dregs. Ultimately, we were just thankful for the protein as we mentally and physically prepared for Gibraltar climb. Perhaps one of the most scenic parts of the route is the second half of Mountain Drive. It just really feels like you're in the American Riviera.
No climb starts.
Okay, K1, here we come.
Gibraltar climb is punishing. It's also beautiful. So it's got that going for it. You can't really get better views than this on the Century. Pretty epic. It's also worth mentioning that Ethan bonked twice on the way up Gibraltar. The second time he actually told me to leave him, which I did, and I thought by the time I'd get to the top he'd be in his hot tub. But when I get to the top, 10 minutes later, Ethan's asking me if there's burritos. Absolutely wild Lazarus moment. Aid Station 4 in the top of Gibraltar climb. Provisions-wise, it was pretty much like all the rest, plus they had Taco Bell burritos, which were a total treat. As a 100-miler, I was able to pick up my additional bag of treats that I had packed that morning, most of which I actually ended up eating towards the end of the ride.
Are you gonna do it?
I mean, why not?
I feel like you have it in you.
You have 2 beef and cheese burritos inside you now, so
Ripping. Even though you finish the Gibraltar climb, you still have another grueling climb to go, and that's to get to the top of Cathedral Peak, which is the highest elevation on the entire ride. It was a grind to get there, and we went slow because we were so full of Taco Bell. But in hindsight, we were really thankful that we went slow because it gave us more energy after the descent when we still had over a quarter of the ride to finish. There's a couple medium-sized descents down from Cathedral Peak before you hit a couple punchy climbs and one more big descent to the bottom. Yeah, that was top of the last climb. Oh, yeah. Now we're going out there. And then back to there. The biggest descent of the whole Century ride goes down Painted Cave and Old San Marcos Road. You lose 3,000 feet of elevation gain before you can even blink. The road's so rough it feels like your hands are going to fall off, and you're squeezing the bars so hard that your neck and shoulder muscles are cramping. Thankfully, Ethan and I are super confident descenders, so we had some fun, but not without pain in the aforementioned areas and areas not previously mentioned. Aid Station 5 was at the bottom of the big descents and by far the best aid station of the entire day. The staff was incredibly friendly. They offered to rack your bike for you. There was fresh cut fruit, hot pizza, and a bunch of different sweets to choose from, as well as the usual assortment of goos and cookies. We actually stayed here for a few minutes to let our stomachs settle after the descents blended up all the electrolytes and Taco Bell like a Vitamix. The section between Aid Station 5 and 6 is legendarily known as being flat and fast. If you've got a lot of guys you're riding with, it can be fast. For us, it was just flat. Fortunately, the rest of the ride is marked with huge bike lanes and open bike paths, so as your focus begins to fade and you start thinking about the finish line, you won't veer into oncoming traffic. Aid Station 6 in the final aid station of the ride. Provisions-wise, they had hot pizza, snacks, and some water, but not much else. It's obvious why this wouldn't be the most heavily provisioned aid station, as you do have under 15 miles before the end of the ride. And this is considered the home stretch. Ethan Elisara, straight off the couch after his honeymoon, hasn't ridden for a month. You weave through a couple more miles of bike paths before going through Hope Ranch, which is the home of a few Fortune 500 company founders, as well as many celebrities. All the big estates and people on horseback were nice and distracting as our legs were fried and our minds were set on the end.
That concludes the last climb. It's all downhill from here. Holy smokes.
And we made it. Thankfully, we were both still standing so we could get a photo at the finish line. We also ended up grabbing a random photo with a guy who stuck onto our tails for the last quarter of the ride. It was great getting to know him and chatting a little bit. And ultimately, I think that's kind of the theme of this whole event, right? It's a ride, it's not a race. So you get the opportunity to meet some really great like-minded folks that just want to be on their bike and want to push their bodies to do something that maybe they never have done, or maybe they do it once or twice a year and they just enjoy the experience of being outside and pushing their bodies, getting exercise, staying fit. It's really a good time being in close proximity with a lot of people like that. I'm really looking forward to next year, and I'm hoping that I can find a big group of people to stay with for longer. I feel like drafting could have shaved off close to an hour of our time otherwise. But ultimately, there's no complaints. It's had to be one of the best days on a bike I've had in my entire life. Thanks to SB100 and all the people that put this event on. It was a great time. See you next year.